All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much, Dr. Lynn, for giving this presentation today. The Texas Region Alumni Association and Alpha Mu Tau Alumni Association are sponsoring this workshop today for the Texas region. And we're very grateful for them doing so. And I think that this topic in particular is important because many of us have been taught an outdated way of doing resumes, and we need to break away from that because that's just not what jobs are looking for anymore. And recruiters aren't looking at those old standard one-page objective statements, all that. They aren't looking for that anymore. And so I think that this is really valuable information. And so again, I thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Thank you, Mary Linder. Dr. Linder one day, right? Okay. I'm so happy to be here and talking about resumes. Actually one of my favorite things to talk about. And once upon a time when I was in college, I had a little resume business, and I would actually do these things for lots of people, and lots of people got jobs. So I was really good at it then, and I just kind of keep up with what's really cool and what's happening, and also just kind of give you some tips and tricks that I've learned along my 33 years of working in and around helping students get jobs. So let's move it. Let me share my screen. And I'm going to share a little PowerPoint presentation with you. Go ahead and crank it on up. And all right, so I think what we'll do with this presentation is just talk a little bit about the cover letter and the resume itself, you know, the do's and don'ts. And the cover letter is something I really want to talk through. You don't see as much about the cover letter. And then let's take a field trip and take a look at some resumes that I've built and kind of help some students build, and some student resumes. And then kind of to round it all out, I think I'll move into some interview tips, just a few little things that I've learned. So, before we get started at looking at cover letters, let's take a look at some of the technical tools that I think will help you guys with your resumes. I know that you think of PowerPoint as sort of a way to do presentations, and the one you're looking at right now I did with PowerPoint. But I love to use PowerPoint as kind of a design tool, and I kind of teach it to students. I mean, you have other products like Adobe InDesign, and I do have a copy of that, and I use it from time to time, but I think most often Microsoft PowerPoint is sort of a go-to, very basic design tool that I use. And I think to me, it's the best hack out there for creating sort of a really professional looking resume without having to have a ton of design skills. But of course, if you are, you know, going into graphics design and you're going to get a job in some of those fields that are expecting that creative to be completely on the cusp, I don't recommend you using Microsoft PowerPoint. But for everybody else, I think it actually is a pretty cool little tool for us to work with. And so that's what I'm going to be talking a little bit about. And, you know, you might be thinking, okay, how would you use PowerPoint to basically make a resume? Well, you know, PowerPoint slides come in this sort of landscape, you know, 8.5 or 7.5 by 14 kind of slide. But if you go straight into the design tab on your resume, on your PowerPoint, you can change it to a custom slide size of 8.5 by 11, and boom, you've got, you know, a sheet of paper that you can kind of lay down your ideas on, and it really works pretty well. The basic tools within PowerPoint that I use to build resumes are really, really super simple. You use them all the time. You probably just don't use them for a resume. One of the things I use on the toolbar of PowerPoint is the online pictures. Like if I'm inserting a graphic, and you know, I went to Mississippi State University. So when I'm talking about Mississippi State University, I want to insert their logo, and I find it using this online pictures tool. And I'll pull it up and show you a little demo in a minute. I also use shapes, designs from the shapes. I draw rectangles. I use it to draw graphs on my resume when appropriate, and I'll take a look at some of that. I also love the icons. It's come a long way. If you haven't looked in PowerPoint's icons, they have these beautiful icons now, and they basically can represent anything. One of my jobs that my very first job in my career was teaching in a high school. And so I always put that little bit of experience on my resume, and I insert the icon of a little apple when I'm talking about my teaching experience. I also encourage you to make your resumes interactive by linking them. Like if you have some work out there that is published, put in a link and link to, and make your resumes come alive. And you do that by linking them and allowing the person to just turn around and click on something, and then boom, they can go visit your work. Like maybe that's a website, or maybe it's an article about you, or maybe it's an article that you wrote. And I do it all the time. If I write articles, I'll put them on my resume, and then people who are reading about me can then go click on it and read my work. I use text boxes for everything, so I have total control over where the text goes and what it goes on top of. So even if you insert like a rectangle, you're allowed to type in it, but you have no control. It always wants to center it. So if you are inserting, say, a rectangle onto it, then I would insert a text box on top of the rectangle to put the text exactly where you want it to go. Also, there's symbols that I use from time to time, and to use accents like the accent grave that goes on top of the word resume. So anyway, these are just some of the basic tools that I use within PowerPoint to build a resume, and I'll kind of do like just a little, just to make sure you're understanding this. So like we're in PowerPoint right now. If I do, file a blank presentation. So this is like blank presentation, get rid of that, get rid of anything that's there, make it just white, go up here to the design, and just hang out around slide size and go to custom slide size and say I want it to portrait. And
We're still only seeing the regular presentation.
Oh, you are? Okay. It's not good. Oh, I see. It only shares one at a time. Bummer. Thanks for that. Okay, so I shared, you can see a blank presentation now, hopefully, right? So I go to design and go to slideshow, and slide size, go to customize, and tell it I want this to be portrait, and I want it to be 8.5 by 11, and then all of a sudden you have a sheet of paper that you can work with. You can insert a shape, let's say at the top, and the reason I love this is because I can pull the color from edge to edge. They call that something called a full bleed. When their printers call that a full bleed from corner to corner. And when you do that, and you publish this as a PDF, it'll maintain that look of having that end to end color, and you won't have like this gap of white like you do when you do these in Word. And I maybe do insert maybe a text box here at the top of this, and put in, something like that, and white. Yes, make the text white. But you can, just do pretty much anything you want here. And then boom, I've got kind of like a little bit of a letterhead here going. And this is actually one of the first things I do when I build a resume, is make just a personal letterhead. I think I'll stop sharing and have to go back in and share my presentation again to get us back on. Because, a couple of things, if you're going to use PowerPoint, don't go entirely crazy with the things that you can do. Make sure you also abide by a certain number of rules. I think one of the things I see most often that is not good is using the weird fonts, or using like tons of different kinds of fonts. Your eyes don't really adjust well to the fonts. So I would choose a very readable font like Helvetica. That's one of my favorites, or even Arial. Verdana, that font is used on the internet, and it's used for a reason because people can read it well on their screens. I know once upon a time we used Times Roman for resumes, but it's actually one of the most highly unreadable fonts ever. And so I think one of the more modern things that you really need to do is pick a very readable font. And it may seem kind of boring to you, but it really pops when you put it with colors and everything. And I would just basically stick with probably one of these fonts I have on the screen here. Also, if you're going to be using color, I would stick with just maybe one type of color scheme. Don't go 25 different colors. And if you're going to pick a color, use something with a color contrast. When I applied for the job here at Phi Theta Kappa, obviously the colors are blue and gold. So I created like a blue and gold resume. Lots of jobs have, companies have logos, and you can kind of tune in maybe to a little bit more of the company culture or the organizational pride or whatever by choosing colors that maybe resonate with your potential employer. And that might be something else to think about. Here's a kind of a slide of maybe what some of the icons look like. If you're sitting around playing with your PowerPoint, you can go up to insert icons and you can search for anything. And I love to use icons because they catch the eye. Obviously, people are looking at your resume and maybe they're seeing you use just a few icons to kind of explain yourself a little bit clearer about some of the work that you've done or maybe the education that you've had. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about these when we go on a field trip and take a look at some of the resumes, but it's really useful, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So let's, now that I've kind of introduced you to some of the tools that you're going to need, which is all you're going to need is PowerPoint and the internet connection. Let's take a little bit of time and talk about the cover letter, because I think it's so important. I think a lot of people don't include a cover letter with their resumes. And I think you might not want to include one. If you're just shooting your resume out into the world and you're giving it to hundreds of people and you're not applying for a particular kind of job, I wouldn't use one. But in every other case, I would. Even if they don't ask for one. If they do ask for one, you really need to use it then. One of the main things that gets you disqualified from jobs is not following directions. So if they say to include a cover letter, make sure you do that. And it's important because it gives an opportunity for the employer to take a look at your writing skills. And those are very important soft skills that you're going to have to work. Anywhere you're going to have to send emails. I can't think of anybody that's not going to have the skill of writing in order to get any kind of career ready job. Okay, so let's take a look. So now that we kind of all agree that we're going to take a look at doing a cover letter, let's take a look at the anatomy of a cover letter. This is just a suggestion. They come in all shapes and sizes. I guess you could write a cover letter and make it say whatever you want, but if you want my little formula that I use when I write them, I keep it pretty simple. You want to give them a writing sample, not the entire life history, and also know that it's accompanied with the resume. So you don't want to keep restating everything that's in there, but you do want to bring yourself forward as quickly as possible. And number one, in the first paragraph, I would say why you're writing them. I'm writing to apply for this job. I think this would be an amazing opportunity and a perfect match for my skill set. If you know someone in the company that told you about the job, you may want to mention that here. Your chances of getting a job somewhere go up by over 50% if you know someone that works there. So a lot of times we'll get jobs by networking. That's why Phi Theta Kappa is so important. You're trying to build a network of people that you know that can connect you to work and to other opportunities. So in that first paragraph, just kind of be clear about what you're doing. I mean, I get letters from tons of people and I want to know why they're writing me. So that lets them know. That second paragraph is really like maybe an executive summary of yourself. It's like, to me, it's the top maybe 2 or 3 things, no more than 3, of why you're the right person for the job you're applying for. This needs to really pull in some of the top qualifications of the job and the skills and then what you have to offer. You just say, I think, I believe I would be such an amazing or, maybe I believe this opportunity suits my skill set perfectly. I can da 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 and da 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 and whatever. And this is where you will just basically executive summary yourself. And if there are like two major things, that make you that perfect candidate, this is where you want to put them. Now, in this third paragraph, this is where you close with a call to action. And the call to action is to contact you. And here, don't put anything silly in this third paragraph, like I can only be reached on Tuesdays and everyone knows that everyone has a busy schedule. So in this third paragraph, always say things like you'll be available anytime at their convenience, not yours. Just don't worry about the fact that you might get an interview at a time that you might not can go. Well, you'll negotiate that down the road. Here is where you try to be as open and flexible and inviting them to talk to you as possible. And those are kind of the 3 paragraph sort of summary that I would use. Now, this is kind of working off the premise that you're applying for a very specific job. So, while you're writing this letter, you have to have the job criteria in one hand and your resume in the other, and you're kind of putting those two things together. So I think that kind of sums that up. So let's move on to the resume.
Dr. Lynn, can I just insert one thing really fast? I'm so sorry.
Absolutely.
On the cover letter, one of the best tips I ever got, and I got to see it in action, was actually when Dr. Molly applied for her job here at Grayson. She took the job description and made a word cloud out of it. And then the words that were the biggest, that's what she highlighted from her skill set in her cover letter, because she knew that was the most prevalent thing that they were looking for. And so that was one of the things that I thought was really very clever and I had never considered before.
Oh yeah, they are looking for a certain skill set, and you'll see it when a job announcement comes out and they say, here are the mandatory requirements. And whatever that employer lists, first, second, and third, that really is their first, second, and third. It's the things they're thinking about the absolute most, and you must address that.
Yeah.
But sometimes we're reaching for a job we may not be completely aligned with, and that's okay too. I encourage you to go after each and every kind of job. Some of the best employees I have here maybe not have been on paper a perfect fit for it, but they went after the job anyway and got the interview, and then things move on from there. This is to help land that interview. But please make sure you have friends proofread all of this stuff. That is another way that really disqualifies candidates from positions. Even here at Phi Theta Kappa, if we see a misspelled word or whatever, it's done. It goes in the trash, and they never get an interview. Okay, so watch that. And if you don't have anyone to read your stuff, one of the things I like to use is the read aloud feature inside of like Microsoft Word or whatever. So just cut and paste whatever it is you're trying to do in PowerPoint into a Word document, and then highlight it and have it read to you. That is an excellent way to catch things. And there's also, computer programs that will also help with your grammar and your spelling. So make sure you utilize all those tools. So now let's kind of move on to the resume, and let's just kind of walk through what should be a part of that. I think, the kinds of things you would always see in a resume, that might not change. We may change the way we present them and the way we write about them, but I would always kind of present your education and your certifications and your experience in your employment. And a lot of times students ask me which one of those should go first. And my answer to them, it really depends on the job. If the job is really looking for a very specific degree, and if you're going into the field of education, I would definitely put my education first. But if you have lots of pertinent experience and employment experience that goes with that job, I might put that first. So it really, or you may want to split your resume into kind of a side by side and put them both first, at one on the left and one on the right, so that you're not saying, hey, one is more important than the other. They're both very important. Those are probably the two focus sections that you have. Another section I would definitely include, and this is kind of newer on resumes, is a kind of a quick list of your skills. Again, these skills align with the job announcement and the job qualifications. Okay, so you don't just put any skills, you put the skills that you have that you know that they are looking for. And I'll give you some examples of that in a little bit here when we look at some resumes. And always put your contact information. Your resume may get bounced around out there between employers and departments within a firm or something, but always put your email address. Don't put your home address anymore. Don't put other contact information, just an email. And if you're working for someone and then you're looking for a job, don't put your employer's email, go put your Gmail, go put something that you can definitely receive and send emails from that won't jeopardize your current employment status. So what goes into a resume really depends on what you have to offer. But the organization of it really depends on the job. So there's really two variables here. Some of the things I would never, ever do on a resume is put a home address, any kind of personal information. A long time ago, they used to require personal information at the end of resumes. You just don't do it anymore. It opens the door for discrimination and things of that nature. Don't put your hobbies. Don't use extremely long sentences. And definitely we've kind of already touched on not having any errors in the resume and in the cover letter. So let's make sure that many people get to read your resume. So this is why it's another important thing to be in Phi Theta Kappa, because you'll have people you can ask to read your resume. And there's also some things I'm on the fence about depending on the job. Sometimes we might not have the education and the employment experience, but we have other experiences. Say we're the chapter leader of Phi Theta Kappa. Well, to me, if you're in PTK and you're an active member, that's a professional experience. So I would create sort of a section on your resume and call it professional experiences and put that stuff under there. And I present it to the employer a lot of times as sort of like experience. It's just maybe not employment. It's a different kind of experience, but they are all the skills that you learn can be thought of as employment skills. So that is a section that you may want to consider to put on there if you have a lot of volunteer experience and a lot of things happening, but you're not necessarily maybe in a job per se. Another section you might want to put is leadership. And, it really depends on the job. A lot of times, if you look at job qualifications and they're looking for someone with leadership skills, you may want to try to demonstrate that as a separate section if you have had a lot of leadership training and had leadership roles. Also, I would put maybe the service. You might do a lot of service activities and you might do so much. You want to sort of highlight that part of yourself so they can learn more about you. Sometimes you might want to put proficiency ratings. And when I say proficiency is you may know something, but you maybe don't consider yourself as an expert at it. And this is where sort of the infographic nature of building an infographic resume may come into, play here. Like, once upon a time, I was a computer programmer and I was a really good C++ programmer. And I knew other languages, but maybe not as well. So, I list all the languages, all the programming languages I knew, I listed, and then I would rate whether I was really proficient at them, or if I was just sort of aware of them, or if I felt like, mediocre about them. And so when I was going after programming jobs, they could see that, hey, she really knows a lot of languages. She happens to know the 2 or 3 we're really looking for, but look how much other stuff she knows. And so that, might have helped me get some of the computer jobs that I got through the years. You may want to put a little section of accolades and awards. If you've accumulated a lot of recognition in your life, you may want to put that as a separate section. If you've done publications or presentations, you may want to put that. I think podcasts are kind of a new thing, but I have a separate section on my resume for podcasts, and because, maybe the employer wants to go out and listen to how I do that, how I speak. So maybe that would be a way for them to learn it. Professional organizations is always important, depending on the job. And references, I would always leave these off unless they ask for them. And sometimes they do. So you have to read through all the instructions of what they want. So if they ask for references, put them at the end of your resume. And so these are just sort of my high level tips on resumes. Now, when you're building your resume, I'm going to shoot this up here. And before we go to our field trip and take a look at some resumes, a lot of your resumes will contain verbs. And this is the way you're communicating what you can do. And so I leave this with you, and it's easy to find this on the internet. It's called Bloom's Taxonomy for verbs now, and it's put together as really the kind of the level of learning you're on. The reason I know about this is if you go into the field of education, this is what they give us to become a good teacher. If we want to teach you higher level skills, we actually have to write learning objectives with higher level verbs. So when you get over here to the right of this, it would be under the evaluating, creating. These would be very high level functioning things that you could do. Now, if you're just looking to memorize things, that's under remembering, and that's very low levels of learning. So when you're trying to communicate your skills, you want to use a variety of verbs, and you want to use the right verbs that convey that you have a large amount of knowledge of something, or maybe not as much. I think a lot of jobs are really under this green here, this applying. These are some of the verbs that I would expect to see on a lot of your resumes. You may not be experts in anything yet, but you definitely are applying the knowledge that you've learned in your classes, and probably over into the analyzing category. So those would be kind of where I would hang out. So let's take a look at some resumes. I'm going to stop my screen share so I can actually share them. Let's see. All right. I wish I could share the whole screen, but it won't let me. So let's just share. Can you guys see this resume? Actually, I don't. Let me not share that one yet. Sorry about that. All right. Let me show this resume first. This is a student. He was actually, can you guys see that? Trying to make it more like a page. Okay. So this is OB, and you may or may not know him. He was one of our international officers from a few years ago. He went to community college in Kansas, and then he transferred here at Mississippi State University, and I tried to help him transfer. And then after he finished at State, he was a chemical engineer, and then he was job hunting. So he and I worked on his resume. So he allowed me to kind of show it to you guys. Notice at the top, he used Mississippi State colors. I think the first time he built his resume, he was looking for an internship. And he eventually did get that internship that actually turned into his full-time job. So this was one of the first resumes he built. He put his work experience first here, if you'll notice. He knew exactly what kind of job that they wanted him for. So he knew he had some of the skills for that job. So, you know, the fact that he was his education he put over here, and I think he's saying basically my work experience and my education are the same. I think he used the word relevant here because he did have jobs prior to this, but they weren't the kind of jobs that gave him, engineering experience. So he went with the word relevant here to make sure they knew he had been working, but not in chemical engineering positions. If you'll notice when he puts some of his work experience, he puts 3 bullets. Here he put 4. I really wouldn't put more than 3 or 4 bullets that kind of explain what you did on this job. And these are not just things that he did. He picked these things because they would give him the most support for the job at hand. And so notice his verbs. He designed things. He verified things. He marked up things. He developed things, created, created, but notice how he's using verbs that put him in the position of doing the work associated with these things. And here in his education, he inserted these, logos from the colleges. I thought that was cute. Here he's got leadership and engagement. So he decided to do things that leadership positions that he held, but also other opportunities that maybe not be that were not a job. He might have should have called this leadership and other professional experiences or something like that. But anyway, here he is just kind of keeping track of things that he did. He was a recruitment leader. He was the student association senator. So he here's his Phi Theta Kappa. Instead of listing himself as an international officer, he's calling it an executive internship, because that's exactly what it was. When the international officers come on here at PTK, I call it an executive internship, and we start working on things where he can get to his next steps. Over here, notice he highlights his skills. The Visio, Gaussian, all of these things, we may or may not know what they are, but you can bet the employer knew what these things were, that he needed to know these things to be successful in his engineering job. And of course, he has his awards here. You can click on these awards. I'm not sure you can see the screen once I click on it, but you can see it goes and it takes you to these articles that were about him. I noticed down here, I thought this was a really cute touch. Down here at the bottom, he put the logos of all his student associations that he belonged to. And that was pretty cool. So this is an example of a student resume. I probably wouldn't have put my phone number. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, anyway, this is a good one. I highly recommend. Okay, so let me take you into another resume. I'm going to take you into my PowerPoint resume I built for myself. I guess that was an example of a one-page resume, and your resume will be one page. If you've never really, had that much experience, usually as a student, you can keep them to one page. But notice how he used all of that space and really had a lot of white space in the middle where it's not too busy. But as you get older and more experienced, your resume will grow into many different sheets of paper probably. Mine is 3 on my resume here, and this is my resume. But I have another document that's called my Vita, and that document really lists each and everything I've ever done in my life, and it's probably about 30 pages long. So if I were to ever apply to be, say, a professor or something, I would probably turn in my Vita because it has every publication, every presentation, and things of that nature. This one, let's see. This one is my resume, which means it's a very high level, succinct, 33 or 31 years of experience. It's really 33. This is 2 years old. And I managed to get it on 3 pages. But anyway, that's just where this was. Now, if you'll notice what I did here, this is a PowerPoint. And so I can kind of show you how some of this was done. With these little bars here, I just drew them in. I can move them and things like that. Let's see if I can put that back down. The graphics that I used for the colleges that I went to, I went over here to insert, let's see, pictures, online pictures. And for one of these, I would search for like Mississippi State logo, something like that. And Mississippi State University logo, not State of Mississippi. And so there's the state logo right there, and I double click and insert it. And once it's in the document, you can double click on it and you can size it, probably 0.6 it's a little too small, but you can kind of see where you can just move it right there and drop it down. I probably got the blue color from just playing with these colors over here. You know, you don't have to use the color. I just kind of wanted one little color through the whole thing. I didn't want it too busy. So up here, I put, you know, a high level, my experience in education side by side. And here are all the jobs that I've had through the years. And underneath them, I'm using verbs, provide, facilitate. Sometimes I just put what I did, though. I should have been consistent about putting the verb in the same place. Selection and development, provision. Anyway, you get the idea. This is something else I want to talk to you about for your future. I decided a long time ago when I was probably in your shoes in my first few years of college that no matter what, for every year of my life, I was going to do one major thing that I could put on my resume, whether it was to get a degree that year or to get a certain job or to publish something or to do a presentation. I decided one thing a year. And so what I always do on my resumes is I put the last 10 years, I haven't updated my resume in a few years here, in a year. Sorry about that. I'm not job hunting, so that's good. You know, Mary Linder's one of my bosses. I'm not job hunting, Mary. So anyway, what I did here is I listed the one big thing that I did that year that I was most proud of. And so, you know, I encourage you, whether you're going to do it as part of your resume or just as a life goal, you know, I create what I call this distinction timeline, and it's something that I've always done. I'm proud. I can show you resumes on back for the last 30 years, and they always have this timeline on them to kind of show my employer that I want to do better and better and better and do change, you know, do more important things every single year. Now over here, I don't know, I guess this is up for debate. Here is just all the skills that I have that I think are pertinent to the job that I have right now. And these blocks sort of represent how I feel about how, you know, large of a skill set that is in comparison to the others. So if you look at this, you can see, I definitely think my research and statistics and, you know, my leadership are probably my two largest skills. I think my strategic planning is also, notice I put that at the very top. That's also something. Notice my public speaking is really small. You know, I really have to work very hard at public speaking. I'm a mathematician. So, you know, here we go. And I'm, you know, doing the best I can, but it's something I have to work very hard at. So if you notice, out of all my skills, I have that skill, but I'm not as confident in it as I am research and statistics. Those two things kind of go together. But anyway, I think I'm really good at financial investments and fundraising. So those are kind of, notice fundraising is a little smaller, or actually, I think they're the same size. Okay, and then on to the last page of my resume. This is where I used icons a little bit more. And I just kind of said, oh, here are some of the articles that I've written that I'm really proud of. And, you know, here are some peer-reviewed journal articles I've written. Here's service projects that I've done. Here's some accolades. Here's some professional experiences that I didn't list under that. And, you know, and then I also put a little contact card here with my email and I'm inviting them to be looking at my social media, not stay away from it. So make sure your social media is all nice and tidy, because trust me, when people apply for jobs here at Phi Theta Kappa, one of the things we do is we look right at their social media and see how, you know, how their life is going, you know, basically. Okay, so let me pull back up the presentation and go back to where connection is very slow. Sorry about that. Okay, so we took our little field trip and looked at some resumes. Hopefully you'll have, you know, here's another slide that I put in here. You know, when you think about your work, Apple will start to use a certain language around you may be working on a college project, gain some amazing skills. But can you guys hear me? Because
You're cutting in and out a bit, but yeah.
Okay, here we are again. Sorry about that. I think the storm is really heading through the area now. I've taken the liberty here of translating these words into sort of a more usable language for your jobs. So like if you're working on a college project, to me, that's a large scale service project. If you're a chapter officer, I would call yourself the group leader and use language that employers will understand. So if you're working on a college project, a lot of times you're meeting with the college president and you're sort of serving as the liaison between what the college president wants to do and the work of the student volunteers on campus. And that role is super important. And so, you know, say you're on a college project and you have a certain role, just make sure that you're taking the things that you're learning at Phi Theta Kappa and translating that into very employable skills. Your honors in action project, I would call that sort of an undergraduate research project. I don't know what your role is in your honors in action, but you may be responsible for outreach or the planning or communications or assessment or the effectiveness of the project. These are the words you need to be using when you describe your skill set when you interact with PTK's programs. Okay, so, you know, let me talk a little bit about the actual interview. A lot of companies now are using Zoom for a lot of their first level interviews. So you may end up with just a phone call as your first level, or you may end up on Zoom for a couple of different interviews. So I am going to talk a little bit about how that works. So when you're on Zoom with an interview, don't be a rookie, you know, don't get on and say, hey, is this mic on? Can you hear me? You know when people can hear you. And so get on there with the confidence that when you speak, they're going to be able to hear you. If they can't, they'll let you know. I would not go through all that rigmarole of, you know, can you hear me? And make sure you have a really well lit room, obviously. Make sure you have a strong internet connection. One of the reasons I stayed here today and the staff is at home because the storm is rolling through is because the internet connection here is supposed to be better. But when I'm at home and I'm doing something super important on the internet and my kids are upstairs, I always change the internet password and lock them out. And I literally gobble up all of the bandwidth for myself because I cannot afford to be dropping off the internet during an important professional presentation or interview or whatever have you. So I will literally go to such great lengths to make sure no one is streaming anything while I'm doing my thing. And so I suggest you do that if it comes to that, or get people to get off the connection while you're doing things. Let's talk a little bit about your behavior during an interview. Always keep focused. Don't act bored. A lot of times we'll be interviewing people and you can tell they're just kind of zoning out, and those people are not going to make it to the next round. I think one of the most important things you can do about a job is do the research for that job. You know, not just the research on what should you be paid, because that's going to help you with your salary negotiations later. But you need to know something about the company. When people apply for jobs at Phi Theta Kappa, one of the first things we ask them is, you know, what do you think about the mission of Phi Theta Kappa? And if they don't know the mission, then boom, you know, gone. And it wouldn't take them, you know, a couple of hours on our website to really try to figure out a little bit more about who we are. Even if all they want to do is maybe be an accountant here, or maybe a graphics designer here, they still need to know what this organization stands for and what we're trying to do. And so I would research everything you possibly can about the company that you're about to go work for or try to work for, especially their mission, especially any kind of a plan that they have out there, anything that you can get your hands on from their website or other published materials. And more importantly, depending on the job, come prepared with examples of your work, or be able to speak to them. And again, here, it really depends on the type of job. And also, you know, there's lots of questions that are very common on interviews, and it goes across sectors, you know, like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? I mean, you know, kind of dial in to common questions and practice answering these things so that you can save your on the cuff things for the harder question. Now, my favorite part of an interview is at the end of it, when I ask the person, you know, what do you have any questions? The way it works here is they go through a whole battery of seeing people, but I give the last interview here at Phi Theta Kappa, and I kind of talk to them a little bit, and then I ask them if they have had any follow-up questions. Here are some of my favorite questions that I've received from people. I think that question is really important to me, that it's a thoughtful one, and it leads to a even more dialogue between me and the person. It's not just a one-word answer, so it has to be kind of a high-level question. The other day I was giving an interview to a candidate. So basically, when they get to me, they've already survived and they are the person that the committee wants, but they want to make sure that I want them, and they nominate 2 people to come see me. And so I get to interview 2 people for the final position. And I asked her if you had a question, and she said, you know, explain to me what exactly you're looking for, you know, because the committee asked me if I had a question, and I had some questions, but now that I'm here, what are you looking for? And I thought that was an interesting question. I think it was a little bit of a risk, but I did like the question. And I said, well, if you've made it this far, that means you have the skills and abilities to do the job. I'm actually here to make sure that you fit in with the culture of the organization. I'm here to inspect the cultural fit that you're making. And she said, oh, you know, so I thought that was a real interesting learn for her. And I had to kind of expose what I was even doing. And so that really shifted her questions a little bit. So she was really smart about that, and she got the job. So always make sure you have a question tucked away. And I really encourage it to be about culture, maybe not the word culture mentioned in it, but you really need to understand if that job is the right fit for you. I mean, getting a job is one thing, and then being miserable in it is another, because you don't fit there. Okay. So interviews are 2-way streets, and this is your opportunity. I mean, don't come out with a bazillion questions, but have 1 or 2 questions ready that really mean something to you. And that's really, you know, it for my high level talk on infographic resumes. I hope you picked up something. I am just getting over the flu, so I'm so sorry if I'm trying desperately not to cough in your faces. But this is, I hope there's going to be some good questions out there after all this information I just laid on you.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and let Annette ask her question, and then I've got some questions that have been sent to me in the chat that I'll ask.
Okay. Annette.
Hello, Dr. Lynn. Awesome presentation. Wow, so much information. I was wondering if you guys were going to send out the PowerPoints for us to review all over again, because you did talk about a lot of
We're
information.
recording.
I look forward to looking at the video again, because
yeah,
so much information. And it's
we're recording this.
Amazing how, yeah, I seen that it was recorded, Miss Linda. So I just find it amazing how it has really revolved with the resume writing, as opposed to how it used to be back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And you're so right with interviews on Zoom, because my son had like 3 or 4 interviews on Zoom. Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Sure. Yeah. We're using Zoom to kind of go through like the first and second interviews. And if it's a work from home job, our entire interview process is different. And so the questions that we give people are different if they're going to work from home. It's a very different experience. If they're going to if they're going to work here, they actually have to do their final interviews face to face with us here. But if they're actually an online worker, I prefer everything to be online, and there's a different different questions about that. So that's something else to kind of think through. But Mary's recording it, but I'm also Professor Linder, I'll send you the slide deck too, in case someone does want to look at it.
Absolutely. All right. So one question we got was, can you use this type of resume for academic jobs, or should you stick with more traditional types of resumes?
You know, I wouldn't, if you were doing an academic, like in the field of education,
Mhm.
I would definitely keep the background white. You know, if you'll notice, my resume really wasn't that wild looking.
Mhm.
I did put a little creativity into it. I kept the color screen kind of low. I used icons, you know, and not a lot of pictures. I think you could kind of push a little bit. And even in the world of academics, you want your resume to stand out. You don't want it to stand out like, what is this? So if you notice when I was organizing it, still on a galloping horse, it still looked like a resume. But I would, you know, I designed my resume for the field of education, but it was for someone who's, you know, if you like, if you're going to be teaching online classes, I would say you are. If you're going to be a professor, you really need to kind of show that creativity up front as quickly as you can.
Mhm. Yeah. And obviously I've heard you say this before, like if you're going into a job that's design heavy, then obviously you can add more, make this more robust, because it's dependent upon the field that you're applying for and going into.
Yeah, like if I were a website designer, you know, I would put a section on websites and I would pick like my top 5 favorite websites that I designed, and I would link you to them through the links, and that way you could visit the work. That way there's not a need for a portfolio, you know, so, you know, even if you have your own website, you might want to just dedicate ways to visit it. Don't just say, here's my website, and say, oh, this is my resume. They don't want to go through all of that. So if you're interplaying with work that's published, or if you want to self-publish on your own website, you got to direct them to the very few things you want them to look at.
Yeah, I had an interviewer once asked to see my online class because they wanted to see how I put a class together, how I organized it, what interactive activities I did, things like that. So yeah, the linking is it's helpful. For work experience, should you still list them in chronological order, or should you list them based on what experience applies to the job?
I would list them in chronological order, and I would only list the experience that really applies to the job. But I would, you know, go forwards or backwards. I would probably go backwards though, and list the most recent experience first and go backwards. And the reason you may want to, you know, you might want to do that is you want to show continuity of employment. You know, one of the things, you know, a red flag to me would be that you had a job and then there's 20 years of nothing, and that's okay, but you may want to drop off that 20-year ago job, and if you haven't had relevant work experience in between. So it's a give and take. And then you might want to move some of that to professional experiences and put some of your older stuff under there that's not really what you want to classify as work experience. And maybe just put the last couple of jobs you've had there, and then make a whole nother section for other things that you've done. And you can put the years there as well. So there's a ways to get around it, but you want to show that you've been employed fairly consistently and things like that. So that's how I would handle that.
So we also got a question, does Phi Theta Kappa have sample resumes and cover letters available on the website?
Not on the website. I think this same presentation, probably a Lynn that doesn't have the flu, is in the competitive edge, or it's
Employment Edge?
It's Employment Edge. Okay, we've got another version of this in Employment Edge where Blake and I do it together, and it's probably a lot more fun because Dr. Blake is in it. But it's in there. As far as giving samples of cover letters, I think, Mary, I would just ask Dr. Blake to maybe put some of those in there and link them to them. I don't know if he has the resumes in there.
Yeah.
But I encourage you to just take out PowerPoint and start playing around with your life on there. And the cool thing about it is you can save it and you can update it at any time. When I had, once upon a time, I had a boss that, we all have bosses we don't like, not here at PTK, but, just through my life, I've always, had jobs I really loved, but some of the people I didn't love, right? I know you've had this happen to you, but when my boss would come in there and, tell me something I didn't want to hear or yell at me or whatever, I would always shut the door and I would update my resume. So like, this is what I did. This was therapy for me, to not talk back to him or her and not get myself in a lot of trouble. But my resume was a zinger, and every time someone ticked me off at work, I was working on the resume and I always had it up to date and really looking good for someone that wanted a copy of it. So,
well, speaking of the EDGE programs, we did get a question about where you should put the EDGE programs in your resume.
I would put that under professional experiences. I would literally take the things out of the EDGE programs. I wouldn't list the EDGE programs. I did this EDGE and that EDGE and that EDGE. That's speaking in tongues. Okay, y'all. Go into the EDGE programs and take out the things that you learn from them that you really feel like you've mastered, and put that under professional experiences, or put other professional development, and kind of list the dates or so that you did these things, and list out the learning outcomes from the EDGEs, and do it that way. And if you go inside the EDGEs, the learning outcomes are in the very front of them if you want the verbs and some of the things that you were learning in there, or make up your own language around it. But definitely pull that stuff out and highlight it, and highlight the things that would work well for that job, not just the things that you enjoyed about the EDGEs.
Yeah. Another question. Well, we got some questions here about the interview. Would it be better to have physical copies of your work to leave with them, or just talk about your work?
I think we live in a virtual world, so hopefully you'd be shooting your resume or whatever to the HR person on staff. If you come to a face-to-face interview and you're, no, I would just do everything probably electronically at this point. I really would. If you're in Zoom, I'd put things in the chat, as you're talking about them possibly, or put a copy of your resume in the chat, and then make sure the PDF is published online, maybe in your Dropbox or something, so where they can all look at it at the same time, if that's appropriate. You'll kind of know. When you go through the employment process, a lot of times you hand all this stuff over to the HR people and they're responsible for distributing. You're not. But if you are talking about something specific, they may want you to pull it up. But I would make sure everything is available virtually, not paper copies. That would just be what I would think.
We got a couple of questions about follow-up questions. One, do you recommend asking follow-up questions? And then number two, how many questions should you ask as a follow-up?
I wouldn't ask follow-up questions if they don't invite you. Okay. And if they don't invite you to ask your own questions, you may want to think about whether you want to work there. But because they should give you an opportunity to ask them questions. But if you're given an opportunity, I would have two in my pocket. Now, if the first question goes long, I probably wouldn't ask the second one. But if the first question gets, consumed pretty quickly and there's some space in the air, I would have that second one gunning to go. But there may be things you really want to know. A lot of times, they always ask me what are the next steps, I just don't think that's an important question to ask at the interview. It might be something you might want to follow up later with the HR professionals that you've probably been dealing with through the employment process. They'll be the ones to probably best answer that outside of the group. And I wouldn't ask anything about salary just yet. I wouldn't do that at the interview. There will be steps that you can go down, and we can talk about some of those things later on. But I hope I wouldn't do it personally. not yet.
I think Annette has one more question, and this will be our last question.
Okay.
Yes, this is my last question. Thank you, Ms. Mary. Dr. Linda, what do you suggest for those of us non-traditional students that were stay-home moms that has a gap in their paid work experience versus their volunteer work experience? And that's my last question.
No, I mean, that's why I think you should create the professional experiences section. And I think you should document all of the pertinent experiences that you've had as a volunteer, or, you know, things that you maybe haven't taught yourself. Honestly, I spent most of my career programming computers, but my degrees are in mathematics. I'm a self-taught programmer. And but I did certify myself. So I got out and got certifications, even though I didn't have the degrees. And so there are ways for you to build your whole capacity to present yourself. It doesn't have to be within a job. But, you know, even if you're in some of these classes that you're in, and sometimes you're given projects in your classes, and they're very massive kind of, if you take a look at what you've done in those projects, you may even want to have a section on some of the skills, you might want to call it, learning-based skills, or, other skills or something. And if you've done a lot of interesting work on projects, you want to frame that in there. I mean, and you got to really tune in to what they're wanting on the job, so like the other day I was helping a student who they were going after a job in HR. So if you're going to work in HR, the number one skill is you got to be able to keep secrets. You got to be able to keep secrets. Mm-hmm. And so you got to have highly professionalized person that can keep a secret. And so you want to talk about that skill a little bit, and say that you definitely can do that. So anyway, I mean, these are just kind of off the cuff things that you've got to look at the job you're going after, and you got to think about the skills. And so if you don't have the experience and you don't have any of that, you want to showcase other things. And there's lots of ways to do that are real creative.
Yeah, absolutely. You also have to be able to keep secrets with your regional coordinator, because you get Hallmark scores. So just saying.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's hard for me. They don't even tell me anything, because I'll call up the advisor and I'll be like, that was such a good project. Are you coming to convention?
I know, right? You gotta be there. No, my chapter, it drives them crazy, because they try to figure out if they can get hints. And I'm like, nope, it never works. So funny.
Well, I've enjoyed being around you guys today. You may want, if you can think of a follow-up question, just shoot Mary, and we'll talk about it. And, I enjoyed spending some time with you guys today, even if it is on Zoom.
Yes, we do appreciate
seeing your faces.
Yes, we appreciate so much. There's a lot of really great information. I think what sometimes people don't realize is that what's expected in these resumes is always changing. And so it's important to keep up with what they're looking for in the marketplace right now, so that you can make yourself more competitive for the job. So again, thank you, Dr. Lynn. We really appreciate it. Thanks again to the Texas Regional Alumni Association and the Alpha Mu Tau Alumni Association. We're extremely grateful for y'all sponsoring this for us today. I am going to stop the recording here in a second, but we will be putting the recording on our YouTube channel. We'll share on social media when that is available. And so you can go back and look at it again if you want to, as well as share with your chapter mates and anyone else you think could benefit from this very valuable information. So thank you very much.
Thank you.